Hello, I'm Eva, and I would like to welcome you to another episode of The Charm of It, a podcast for knitters who share my fascination with the nitty-gritty details of our craft. If you're a returning viewer, it is so nice to see you again, and if you're a new viewer, I'm glad you found your way to my little corner of the internet. If you're wondering what kind of projects you'll see, I tend towards things that are pretty but practical, in mainly cooler, muted colors, unless I'm gift knitting. This is the brightest thing I've ever knit for myself. And I have a fondness for detail and intricate embellishment that borders on the Baroque. So that should give you a little bit of an idea. I record 2 different kinds of episodes, and today is a regular episode. So in addition to talking about finished objects, I will be sharing a bit of fiber quotes from a novel that I was reading. I'll be doing a needle review instead of a yarn review. I'll do another Schrodinger segment, although this time it will be about socks, not sweaters. And if I have time, I might talk a little bit about some reevaluating I've been doing on ease in sweater knitting. These are my co-hosts, Moth the cat and Thistle the dog. And clearly they are pretty thrilled at the return of sweater weather. So, as I mentioned, I did knit this sweater. I believe in May I finished it. And it is the Raspberry Tart cardigan. How about we don't rip it apart with our paws? It is sort of based on the Boudica pattern, but I did quite a few modifications, including adding these little cables. And it's knit out of Elspeth silky wool, so you can find any more details that you're interested in on my project page. But yeah, because this yarn is only 40% wool, the other bits are 40% silk and 20% nylon. It's really nice for when it's not quite cool enough for a wool sweater, but I don't know, transitional weather, too cool for my linen ones. So, and I am drinking hot tea again. Hurrah! Summer is not my favorite month. Okay, so let's get into finished objects. I have 2 today, one of which you've seen on the podcast before and one of which you have not. So I will start with the new ones, and they are my Lepidoptera mitts, which I really, really love. Really love. Okay, so here they are. Ah, they're so pretty. They are knit, here's the palms, using a paid-for pattern, which are the underwing mitts, and you're supposed to duplicate stitch a bright color onto the bottom of the mitts, but I've decided I really like them more subtle rather than with the bright pops. I love the designer's version too. Yeah, so by, I think, Erica Lueder, and I knit mine in Brown Sheep Nature Spun fingering, which is a very fine fingering. It's over 300 yards and 50 grams. And the colorways are ash and blue fog. And apparently today is going to be an anti-focus day for the camera. There we go. Isn't that the most beautiful moth chart? I love it. I really feel that this needs to be on everything. I have enough yarn left over for a matching hat, and then I might end up doing a sweater or something too. But so, details. I sort of knit these according to pattern. Of course, I made a few modifications. The first one I made was I knit these at a much tighter gauge. I used size 0 needles, and as I said, this is a very fine fingering weight yarn, and I was careful to keep my tension pretty snug. So I'm getting between 10 and 11 stitches per inch, which I think is part of what makes the moth so beautiful, because since it's at such a fine gauge, those curves have a chance to really curve. Like, you know how if you're trying to draw a circle on graph paper and each square is that big, the circle is not going to look very round. But if each square is tiny, then the circle will look much rounder. So yeah, I'm really pleased with that. So, and the reason why I did that is because the mitts are only written for one size, and I want to say it's around 64 or 68 stitches, and I have quite small wrists and hands, and that would have just been swimming on me, and I really dislike mitts that are baggy, because then the wind gets in. As you can see, they are quite short, because a tighter gauge shrinks your row as well as your stitch gauge. And I decided that I didn't really mind that. I'm kind of experimenting with different lengths for mitts. I could always go back and make this longer if I wanted to, but you see the little moons on the cuff too? I'm not sure if I showed those off. And they're on both sides. So let's see, I also did a tubular cast on and bind off because those are my favorites to go with 1x1 twisted rib, which is what the pattern calls for, because it just makes a really neat finish. There we go. So tubular bind off, tubular cast on. And then I modified the thumb gusset. As written, the thumb gusset has you increasing 2 stitches along that center stitch each time. I knit a pair of gloves early in my knitting career with that style increase, and I hate the shape. I pretty much don't wear those gloves because the shape of the thumb annoys me so much. So I knew that I didn't want to do that. I prefer it when the thumb gusset increases are all on the outside. Hopefully that makes sense. So because of the change, I just kind of glanced at the thumb gusset chart and did what I think replicates it, but I'm not really sure. And then I also, instead of having the thumbs on the sides, I always place them a few stitches in towards the palm. So like this is the side seam, and then the thumb I started right after them. So yeah, those 2 modifications aside, the only other thing I did was in the pattern, rings catching on floats. Okay, there we go. In the pattern, the colors are reversed. So where I have this ash color, because to me that's a much more moth-like color, she had a navy blue, and then I have blue for the background, and she had a white. So I mainly switched them because I wanted my moths in a realistic color, but I didn't want the moon to be blue. So down here I kept it in the written directions, and then up here I just flipped it. And so the only change that I had to make to accommodate that, other than, you know, switching the squares in my head, was there are a few stripes in the pattern that just didn't work since I was switching background colors. So I skipped a couple striped rows, but that's it. And yeah, I love these so much. I think they turned out so wonderfully. The pattern was very easy to follow. The graphs were nice, and everything made sense. As I said, that style gusset is not something that I would do, but you know, different people prefer different fits in their thumbs. And yeah, I was really pleased with it all, and I love these mitts. I can't wait to wear them with like little coats and jackets come true autumn. We're having one sweater weather day here, but it's gonna warm up again, as it always does in the summer. This is my second time knitting with Nature Spun Fingering. The first time was also for a pair of mitts, and colorwork mitts, and I didn't like how those turned out at all, and I think part of it is because I was knitting at a much looser gauge. So I'm quite curious, since I quite like how this knit up at such a fine gauge, so it's almost like a lace weight. I'm curious about future sweaters. However, I'm going to have to wear these and evaluate them for prickle factor before I decide on any sweater quantities. It's a very affordable, made in the US yarn that comes in quite a few different color options, in case you haven't heard of it. And this was some of the oldest yarn in my stash. I think this might have been the first yarn that I bought when I bought it online. And the other really exciting thing to me about how this worked up at a fine gauge, I tend to be a loose knitter, so I was really pleasantly surprised that I was able to comfortably knit at 10 stitches per inch with this yarn. And that's really exciting for me because almost every colorwork sock pattern that I have found have a bunch of stitches, because most people, when they're knitting colorwork, stranded colorwork, their gauge tightens, but mine doesn't. And I have quite small feet. So for instance, I would love to knit myself a pair of water for elephant socks, but that chart is 72 stitches, and it would be quite difficult to take out enough stitches to get to my size foot. But now that I know that this yarn knits up for me at 10 stitches per inch, I could definitely use it for socks. It is 100% wool, there's no nylon in it, but one of my favorite sock yarns, Quince & Company Finch, is also 100% wool. So, and I think when you're knitting it at such a fine gauge, or such a tight gauge, sorry, there's going to be enough durability there anyway. I've never had a pair of hand knit socks wear out. So clearly I'm not super hard on them. But yeah, so I love these so much. And they are my first entry for Jacqueline's Brookston Hipster Cow knit along, which I love. I love this. I think it's such a clever name and a great idea. So the idea is that you're knitting projects patterns. You're knitting patterns that have less than 30 projects already knit. So basically the idea is to go away from the really popular patterns and go towards maybe some hidden gems that have not been seen before. So, and Jacqueline just came up with such a fun name for it as well. So these qualified, I think they were at around 15, 16 projects, so they would still qualify if you want to knit them for that knit along. And I already have another project that I'm working on for that knit along too. I tend to knit less mainstream projects, so this knit along is right up my alley. Okay, second finished object is a gift knit. It is the Sailing the Seas dress, Sail the Seas dress. It's a baby dress, and I love it so much. I'm so pleased with how this turned out. Let's see if I can shake it out so that you can see. There we go. Isn't it so pretty and cute? Here is a close-up of the yoke. And on the back, there's like a keyhole neckline with a single button. This is the Clara dress pattern, and it's available in public domain because it's a very traditional, classic Scandinavian baby dress pattern. And I have linked to the Ravelry user who has that link to the public domain pattern. So that's the one that I used. I know that some people were asking. And I knit the larger size, which the pattern says is for an 18-month-old. It's the 240 stitch cast on. And my friend's baby, her name is Avery, the baby. She was born in April, so she's quite young still. However, I didn't see the point of knitting something in a newborn size because then she would have outgrown it really quickly. And I found a few, one knitting mom had posted that when she knit this size, it fit her 1-year-old, her 2-year-old, and her 4-year-old as a dress, then a tunic, and then just like a cute swing top. So I'm hoping that this will get a few years of wear. I added about an inch to the length. I knit for 10.5 inches before starting the yoke, and that was definitely, it didn't feel like I was knitting a baby knit. It felt like I was knitting a sweater for me because 240 stitches and you're knitting at about 6 stitches per inch is a 40-inch circumference, which is more than a sweater for me, so that was pretty funny. But once I got to the yoke, then it felt like a baby knit because it just flew really quickly. So I'm really delighted with how this turned out. And I have decided I'm going to make a full layette set for it. So I've already knit a little bow to do for a headband. And I'm also going to do a bonnet and booties. And the booty pattern is a little Mary Jane one, and it calls for a button on each. And I've got these little metal floral buttons, and I've only got 2 of them. So I was thinking about putting one on the dress, but I decided to save those for the booties and then just put a gray plastic iridescent button on the dress. Instagram people were happy to help me choose because there were way too many button options. When you only need one, then everything in your button jar is at your disposal. The yarn is Rowan Summer Light, which is a fingering weight 100% cotton yarn in the aqua colorway, and it's a really beautiful kind of complex blue-green color. It's quite cloudy out today, so it's a little, there we go. And the skirt part took just about 2 full skeins, which the skeins are 50 grams each, and I think around 180, 190 yards, because cotton fingering weight yarn, you get less yardage than wool. And then, yeah, so that got me up through the waistband of the yoke. And then to do the top bit and the sleeves, I think only took maybe 12 more grams. I can check. I definitely have enough left to knit a mat, like a full layette, which is very exciting. When I was buying the yarn, I really wasn't sure how much it would take, so I went ahead and got 4 skeins or 200 grams, just because some of the people, their dresses seem to call for a lot of yarn, and it was on sale at my local yarn shop, so I think it was only like $5 or $6 a ball, so at that point I knew I would be kicking myself if I ran out. Oh, it took another half skein. So the total dress is 119 grams, so yeah, about 20 grams for the yoke and 100 grams for the skirt and the waistband. I pretty much followed all the modifications that the user who has also posted it in public domain recommends, and that link is on my project page. The only thing I didn't do is she recommended doing Jenny's surprisingly stretchy bind off at the top, and I tried that, but it was going to stretch out too much, and all I could picture was, because this is a seamless dress, was the yoke sliding off her shoulders, and that just didn't seem like a good idea. I imagine that if you're knitting this dress in wool instead of cotton, then the bind off is going to behave differently, but the cotton has, you know, I think it really needs a sturdier bind off, so I just did a regular bind off in the pattern, which is seed stitch. And then for the sleeve cuffs, you knit the seed stitch part at the end, and I went up a needle size, so I knit most of the sweater on a US 1.5, which is a 2.5 millimeter, and for the sleeves I just went up to a US 2, which is a 1.75 millimeter, because all the babies I know have really chubby upper arms, and so I just wanted to make sure that there would be no, no squishing of adorable little baby Pudge with the sleeves. And I figure, you know, if they're too loose, then it will still look kind of intentional. It'll just look like little wings. I feel like it's prettier in real life than it's showing up on the video, but I'm really delighted with it, and I think my friend will be too. She has a very kind of classic preppy style for her children. For the book that I'm going to read to you, it is Solstice Wood by Patricia McKillip, which is a fantasy novel set in, I'm pretty sure it's upstate New York, but definitely kind of the northeast US in the backwoods. And it is about a young woman who has to return to her ancestral home to bury her grandfather, and her grandmother is trying to keep her in the house. And it turns out that the woods that are attached to their house and their property have what's the word? Tunnels? Loose places where fairies can pass over. And these are definitely the kind of majestic, frightening fairies. I would say they feel kind of Celtic British Isles, not like cute little fairies that hop around in flowers. Okay, so the reason why I thought this would be a fun book to read from is because at the center of the story is a fiber circle, and a collection of women get together and they can do any fiber craft that they want. And as they're doing these fiber crafts, not only are they making the objects in our world, the material objects, but they're also working basically a magical process, and that becomes revealed throughout the book, so I don't want to get more into that for now, but it's a really excellent book. It also has a changeling in it. I don't know if you love changelings as much as I do, but it's in that, and Patricia McKillip's stuff is always very, very readable. You want to keep reading because you want to find out more details about these worlds that she's imagined. This novel is set in our world, but most of her novels are set in kind of completely different worlds, and they're almost all standalones. And I am just in awe of how fertile her imagination is, because the worlds are all very different. They function differently. The magic in them functions differently. And what I really love about her, is that she doesn't spoon feed you anything about her worlds. You have to figure it out as you go, and usually for the first couple chapters I'm completely confused, but in a really good way. And her writing is very oblique. And yeah, so she's definitely a beloved fantasy author of mine. And as I said, her books all have quite different ideas that she's exploring, but they all definitely have a kind of mystical, otherworldly sense to them that's really enjoyable. She also writes really good short stories. Those tend to be a lot more like this novel, set in our world and the intersections between our world and fairy, I guess you would say. So they're more straightforward in my opinion. This is the most straightforward. of her novels that I've read. I think I've read most of them at this point. Okay, so let's see. A baker's dozen turned out, counting Sylvia. The Star twins and Penelope had come at 7:45 on the dot. Is that where I should start? Hang on. I should have marked it better. Yeah, I'll start there. So basically, I'm going to read you quite a long passage that introduces all of the women who are part of this fiber circle. A baker's dozen turned out, counting Sylvia. The Star twins and Penelope had come at 7:45 on the dot, Lucy and Miranda in pastel crepe in their usual pearls and gold, as if they were going to a wedding or a funeral. These days it's hard to tell, with everyone wearing black to both, until they bring the bride or the body out. The twins sat on the velveteen couch together and took out their work, while Penelope added a huge rhubarb pie to my plate of cherry chocolate cookies on the sideboard. Penelope wore jeans and high-top sneakers with glitter all over them. Her hair glittered oddly, too, in the lamplight. So did her eyelids. Well, even at her age, she was still a child compared to me at my age. This is the grandmother narrating. And with her round, sweet face, she could get away with a lot more than most. She sat down, the quilt she was stitching by hand tumbling out of the bag at her feet. Genevieve McIntosh and Hilary Cross had come down the mountain together. They took turns driving each month. Hilary, with her big fierce eyes and short spiky hair, looked like an owl. She hated to cook. She brought a big bottle of white or red that always got emptied by the end of the evening. That night, most likely considering the occasion, she brought both. She wore holey jeans and muddy garden clogs that she kicked off at the door. She unrolled one of what she called her fabric paintings, a concoction of scraps and buttons, beads and trim she pieced together until for some reason she declared it done and framed it. They were pretty things, made of velvet and brocade, satin, watered silk, fabric she wouldn't be caught dead wearing. Genevieve tended bar at the village grill, though she didn't look old enough to drink, which she didn't anyway, except for herbal teas. She was very tall and willowy, the way they grow these days, with long, straight blonde hair and calm gray eyes. She wore boots and a cowboy hat, a sweater that almost hid the garnet stud in her navel, but not quite. She put a mountain of peanut butter chocolate chip cookies on the sideboard and pulled out the booty she was knitting for her sister's baby. The principal's wife, Charlotte Henley, brought wool from her own sheep. She was crocheting an afghan for her teenage daughter. As always, she had made her cocktail meatballs, which never tasted the same twice. She made the sauce out of whatever she had in the back of the refrigerator, marmalade one month, peach jam the next, along with a healthy dollop of soy sauce and enough garlic to stun a vampire. A slight woman with a no-nonsense jaw and manner, she wore her platinum hair cut just so to her chin and parted on the right. In the 9 years she'd been coming to the meetings, I never saw a hair's worth of change in it. Jane Sloane, the village historian, came in with her embroidery bag dangling from her walker. She had seen as much local history as I had and kept track of it for the Historical Society over in Highland. She had published a history of Linwood years earlier and was working on another secret history, about which she consulted me to niggle over points of memory. We had known each other since before the invention of the diaper pin. She moved slowly across the room with her walker, dressed to the nines in a suit and a hat with a couple of pheasant feathers curling down the brim. She reminded me of Liam's mother Meredith, the same beady magpie eyes looking for the chip in the cup, the dust on the whatnot shelf, the same pursed mouth, out of which dropped lemons and sour grapes more often than not. But there wasn't much those sharp eyes missed, and what Jane spoke stayed spoken. She took her usual place beside me on the tapestry couch, leaving her daughter Agatha, with her big eyes and big placid body, turning vaguely in the middle of the room, looking for a place to sit. Sylvia waved her over to an empty chair beside her, and Agatha's face brightened. She seemed bovine, even at third glance, the ox-boned, slow-moving countrywoman living behind her uncertain girl's face most of her life. But she worked magic with her hands. Her quilts hung in craft museums, her spiced pears made you want to lead a better life. She was kind to her difficult mother. She understood without being told what monsters lurked in an old woman's bedroom in the dark of night. She put a plate of savory mushroom turnovers on the sideboard before she sat, causing a moment of respectful silence as we acknowledged them. Skipping over a couple paragraphs. Bet Harvey and Jenny Crane came in as she spoke, two sisters who drove together from the next valley. The older, Bet, was tall and rangy, with long black hair in a clip. Jenny, shorter, stouter, kept her short gingerbread hair in the pin curls fashionable half a century ago. They had been born on a farm, they married local farmers, raised children and crops indiscriminately, it seemed. They drove big old station wagons that disgorged endless quantities of dogs, betting plants, soccer teams, balls, bats, rackets, groceries, canning pots, school play decorations, and slumber parties on their way to or from wherever. They both carried overstuffed knitting bags. They were always halfway through a ski sweater or a baby afghan for someone. Bet put a veggie tray with dip onto the sideboard. Jenny added a fruit tray with dip. Then they turned simultaneous Lee smiled at me, turned again, and had a hard look at Sylvia. Then they sat in a couple of high-backed oak chairs, unpacking their knitting and whispering together. And at last Dorian came. Jane cleared her throat. It was a signal to me to get things going. Let's see. And there you have it. I really enjoyed hearing about all the different women and the variety of fiber pursuits that they had, so I hope you did too. Now I'm going to do a Schrödinger sock segment. I do apologize for the fact that I have never studied any Germanic languages, so I just kind of blur his name every time I say it. Should have picked a different physicist. Okay, so I've been evaluating my socks because the cooler weather is coming and I was doing some rearranging of storage stuff. And navy blue socks are one of the first pair of socks that I knit, but unfortunately I knit them out of yarn that has not held up well, and I reviewed that on a different episode. But so I don't really like wearing them anymore. They make me sad instead of happy, because it was also the most expensive yarn I've ever used to knit socks, and it was just, I don't know. However, one of the pair of shoes that I wear most in the autumn is a pair of T-strap navy shoes, and sometimes I like to match my socks to my shoes. And also, I wear a lot of navy in general, so it's nice to have a pair of matching socks. So, I have had these two skeins. I'm sorry, I did not realize there was going to be vacuuming in the hallway. Hopefully I can edit most of that out. Which are Quince & Company Finch, which is one of my very favorite sock yarns. It's 100% American wool, fingering weight, and this is in Peacoat, which is a really dark navy, which I'm not sure if I would want to wear a navy this dark as a sweater, but it's perfect as socks because my pair of navy shoes are very dark. They're almost black looking. I don't wear black, that's why I wear quite a bit of navy. So I've had these in my stash for a really long time. And regular socks usually take 60 to 75 grams. So this is more than enough to make a pair of just solid colored socks. But I also have a skein of Quince & Company Finch in Fjord, which you can tell I've been playing with this yarn a lot because it doesn't look nearly as pretty as it would if I'd, hadn't messed with it after I bought it from them. And this is in the Fjord colorway. And aren't they charming together? And maybe I need another pair of striped socks in my life. I only have one pair of striped socks that are gray and white, and I really like them. And I've been adding more stripes to my closet lately because they make me happy. So, yeah, so I haven't been able to decide what I'm going to do there. I could probably get 2 pairs of socks out of these 3 skeins, especially if I made one of the pairs shorter, which is actually, I like a shorter cuff when I'm wearing them with like Oxfords or my T-straps, and then I like a longer cuff when I'm wearing them with boots. Or, yeah. So that would be very doable. I could do a solid navy, and then I could do a blue stripe. But there's also this pattern. It's called the Whitby Stockings, and it's from Modern Vintage Knits. Vintage Modern Knits. And I actually have that book out from the library right now, but I can't get up and get it because Moth is asleep on my lap. So I will show you. Maybe. There we go. Aren't they wonderful? So they're basically striped knee-highs that also have Fair Isle going on. And they're in 3 colors. I feel like you couldn't see the Fair Isle. Maybe if I dim my phone a little. Yeah. Okay, Ravelry does this thing where it gets really cranky if you mess with full screen. There we go. Hopefully you can see that a little better because I love the Fair Isle stripes. They're so wonderful. And I also have Quince Finch. I have a lot of Quince Finch in Chanterelle. And I think that this could be a lovely combination for the Whitby stockings. But I can't do all 3, right? And so I am very torn about what to do. And that is what I would like to hear from you. Should I just do 2 pairs of shorter socks? Or I guess I could do a shorter pair of whippy stockings with just the Fair Isle stripes with all 3 of these. I don't know. I would love to hear your thoughts, and if you have any patterns that you think, I prefer to knit pattern socks to plain vanilla, that would look good in this really dark color, but are not lace, because I don't want these to be lace. I need some firm, solid fabric socks. Let me know that too. I have so many sock patterns in my library. Because there's so many amazing free ones, and then by my library I mean my Ravelry library. And then my city library has a whole bunch of sock books, so yeah. That's what I'm thinking about as far as what to knit, and I'm being very indecisive about it and would love to hear your opinions. I'm actually doing pretty good on time right now, so I'll just briefly talk about sweaters and ease and what I've been mulling lately. As you know, if you watched my last episode, I knit almost an entire worsted weight sweater and then decided to frog it. And one of the reasons why I'm frogging it is because I got the ease measurement. Like, I was mistaken about how much ease I wanted in it. And that really prompted me to go back and measure the sweaters that I wear the most. And what I found that was interesting was that even though I tend to knit sweaters for right around 33 inches at the bust, which would be 0 ease on me, once I've worn them a little, they tend to measure 34 inches around the bust. And I really quite like that. And I'm also, I think I mentioned a few episodes ago when I'd remeasured myself, it would appear that perhaps 33 inches is no longer 0 ease on me. It is instead 1 inch of negative ease, which means that I think my actual bust has increased to 34 at its widest part. Not sure why. I'm 31, so it seems like I would be well out of the range of, you know, changing sizes unless I were to have a baby, but whatever. So I'm thinking that in future I want to plan sweaters to have at least 34 inches at the bust. And I've also been wondering if I shouldn't try having a little bit of positive ease, because if you look at those kind of 1950s style cardigans, which are nipped in at the waist and then quite voluminous at the bust, I think that there was a bit of positive ease there, and I actually think that I might quite like that, because that would mean that it kind of feels like if I put too much negative ease in at the bust, it kind of gets, I feel like I'm smushed, and it almost makes me look like I have a smaller bust than I do. And I've always been wary of too much positive ease because I was afraid that my curves will get lost, because I'm quite thin and I'm not I'm not very curvy, basically. I have a small waist. That's my curve. There's no other curves. So that's why I've always tended towards a very fitted look. But I'm starting to wonder if I still did my usual negative ease at the waist, because I'm doing crop cardigans. In case you're a new viewer, you might not be able to tell, but this is cropped. But then a little bit of positive ease at the bust, it might be that the sweater itself will kind of give me a little bit more of an hourglass shape. I don't know. It's just something that I've been musing on lately. Because after that sweater disaster, I thought it was worth pulling out all my sweaters and measuring them all. And the other thing that I've been thinking about is that it seems like when we talk about sweater knitting, we talk a lot about horizontal ease, right? So like ease at the bust, ease at the waist, ease at the hips. But we don't really talk about vertical ease and how that's affected. So for instance, if I knit all of my sweaters to be about 10 inches long between the cast on edge and where I split from my sleeves, but I knit some of them to be tighter than others, then when I put those tight ones on, they're going to shrink up, right? So they don't hit me in the same spot that looser sweaters do, even if I knit them to the same length. So that's what's been going through my head, is thinking about that kind of relationship between the vertical and horizontal measurements, and how I really need to make sure that I'm taking that into account when I'm planning my sweaters, to make sure that it's the kind of fit that I want. And the other thing that I am wondering about is, in most of my sweaters, I've done that thing where you do the increases from waist to bust, you space them out evenly. So it creates a very even line. But the other thing that I really like about a lot of vintage sweaters is that the waist will be quite fitted, but then it's almost like the body has been gathered into that waist, so the sweater kind of poofs out a little above the waist as opposed to being quite fitted the whole way up. And I kind of like that look too. And I'm not really sure if that happens because there's extra length here, and so when you wear the smallest part of the sweater at the natural point, because there's extra fabric, it kind of sits nicely, like blouses, basically. That blouson effect. Blouson? Don't know how you would say it. B-L-O-U-S-O-N. I'm pretty sure it's a word. But that kind of effect. I would really like to have sweaters that had that effect, but I'm not really sure how to achieve it. I don't know if I need to add more length, but I added a little more length to this sweater to see what would happen. And if I try to wear it blouson style, then it looks awkward. It doesn't look natural and graceful. And I'm wondering if that's because this is very heavily cabled. So cables don't like to drape, right? So maybe I need to try it on a drapier fabric. Or maybe it's because it's a sport weight yarn, so maybe it just needs to be a finer yarn or a looser gauge to get that drape. I'm not sure. So, as I was saying, I don't know if I should add length or if I should add width. So instead of doing the increases gradually, do the increases more quickly after the waist, and then see if that would do the blouson effect. So that's what's been going through my mind lately, kind of rethinking, reevaluating the measurements that I use for sweaters. And I've realized that I really prefer an arm side that's 7.5 inches. For a while, I was thinking I might do 8 inches because then I would be able to layer quite easily, but that's my actual measurement is 7 inches. So 8 inches is too long, and it kind of, not only does it do weird things to the fit, but it makes it kind of hard to move my arms back and forth. So, after doing all of these measurements, I went ahead and wrote my preferred measurements on my profile page that hopefully I will remember when I am planning future sweaters and not just suddenly decide that a worsted weight sweater needs to be 32 inches around the bust, which was a terrible, terrible idea. And so, yeah, that's just, I would love to hear your experiences and your opinions on fit. I know a lot of times it's recommended that you measure store-bought sweaters, and that has worked for me in the past. However, you have to be really careful because most store-bought sweaters are a much finer fabric than a hand-knit sweater is going to be, and so that fabric is going to behave differently. And most store-bought sweaters are just plain stockinette. They don't have cool cables on them, so all of that kind of makes a difference. So, yeah, just things that I'm wondering about, as particularly as someone who is small-busted. So that would be the main fit thing that I'm looking at as far as proportions for my body, because I have quite broad shoulders. So yeah, I like to make sure that the fact that I have a bust is apparent, because I feel like it balances out my shoulders. I don't know. I probably sound ridiculous right now, and I'm not sure how many more times I can say bust before I just start laughing. But those are just some, I guess, more musings and questions than here's what I've learned, you know. But I always love to hear your comments and experiences. So I'm just throwing that question out there. What kind of ease do you like, and what have you found as far as blousing effects? Finally, I thought that I would do a needle review instead of a yarn review. I will be reviewing the Heavy Metal Needles by Dyack Craft, which are interchangeable stainless steel tips. You can get them in 5 inches, 3.5 inches, or 1.75 inches, which is, I'm guessing, for people who like the tiny diameter needles. And they are made by Dyack Craft, which is a very small company in Vermont. So they're made in the US by small business kind of thing. And they range between $20 and $25 a pair of tips, depending on what size you want. And if you order 6 tips at once, then it becomes a set, and you get 3 cables and a little hand-sewn case, which holds all the tips here, and then your cables live in this envelope back here. My tips do not live in there because I've consolidated them all into a different Diet Craft case that came with my wooden one that's wider, so I can have 0 through 8 all in one. But that shows you what the case is like, and there's enough there. So they're available, as I said, in 6 sizes, starting with US 0, which is 2.0 millimeters, and going up to US 3, which is 3.25 millimeters, and that includes 1.5 or 2.5 millimeters and 2.5 or 3.0 millimeters. Okay, so I think those are all the specifics that you need. My set is the 3.5-inch tips because I prefer them. I'm sorry, I was looking around trying to figure out what I'd done with the extra cables, but it doesn't matter. Because that's my preferred length for circular needle tips. So that's what I went ahead and got. And the way that you make them interchangeable, or the way that you attach them to the cables, it's really simple. They just unscrew, and then you screw them back in. And then when you buy them, they come with 2 little rubber bits. And I've got one of the rubber bits it came with, and then just a cut up rubber band. And once you're done screwing it in with just your fingers, I go ahead and tighten it with the rubber band. If I don't, they start to undo. But as long as I tighten them, I don't have any problems with them undoing. And one of the things I love about these sets is that the needle spins 360 degrees. So you don't have an issue with, like, no matter how you turn your needle, the cable doesn't get twisted. Hopefully you can see that, which I think is pretty incredible. This is the size 0 needle, so as you can see, it fits. It's the same diameter as the join. The larger needles are a bigger diameter than the join. I'll show you one of those. However, the join is very, very smooth. I never have problems, and I've knit various lace weight yarns on these, and as long as I tighten them with the rubber band, I never have problems with the yarn catching. So here it is with the largest needle that the set offers. And there's definitely more of a transition there, but as I said, I find these joints very, very smooth, and the cable swivels, which is wonderful. The other thing that I adore about these needles are the tips. So a lot of knitting needles, the tip goes like this, right? But with Diet Craft, they do their tips so that they go like that instead of like that. And that means that the taper is very, very gradual, which, in my opinion, just makes for an easier knitting experience. So I'm going to see if I can hold these 3 up, but they're not any of the same sizes. So here you can see there's a Licca needle, there's an Addi Turbo Lace, and there's the Diet Craft. And do you see how the Diet Craft one doesn't make that like pyramid shape? That makes it so easy to do fussy knitting. So like, you know, purl 5 together or lots of twisted stitches, anything like that. It's very, very smooth. And in case you're wondering, that Addi Turbo Lace is a US 000, which I think is a 1.25 millimeter. No, probably a 1.5 millimeter. So that's why it looks much pointier than the Diet Craft. But in my experience, the Diet Craft needles are as pointy as I need for any kind of manipulation. And I have knit most of my sweaters on these needles because most of my sweaters are fingering weight. So I'm using smaller diameter than my wooden needles come in. And for I find the tips give me a lot of knitting dexterity. I've knit twisted stitch cardigans, I've knit various weird lace cardigans, but at the same time when I'm just doing stockinette, I almost never split yarn. I love these tips. I also love that even though these are metal needles, they're not terribly slick. I have one pair of the Carbons circular needles that have that nickel plated tip. I dislike that tip tremendously. It's far, far too slick for me. It feels just, ugh, it's so slippery. So these are not like that. It's almost like if that slick nickel style is like a high gloss, these would be the matte equivalent. So you don't have problems with the yarn sticking, but you also, there's just enough grab there in order to make sure that you don't have to worry about your stitches popping off, if that makes sense. And I know that a lot of people have felt the Addi Turbo laces, so I would say these are less grabby than the Addi Turbo laces, which, yeah, they're definitely less grabby. However, the heavy metal needles become less grabby as you knit more with them. So, and I've used my zeros a lot. Let me feel. Okay, I've barely used my threes, and they're still less grabby than the Addi Turbo lace. So, if that gives you context, because I know that that's too grabby for some people, and honestly, when I start knitting with the Addi Turbo laces after having used the Dye at Crafts, these feel too grabby to me as well. But they have a really nice feel to them, even though they're metal instead of wood. However, they're not, this is the size 0, and I mean, it's definitely stainless steel. It's not going to bend at all. There's like a little bit of give, as you can see, for when you're knitting with it, but it's just, it's there. I'm the kind of person who, if I use bamboo needles, they all end up curved. And these are actually now available as double points as well, which they didn't used to be available. I was just visiting the website to get the facts. I have double points all the way down to 0 in my beloved Dye at Craft Darn Pretty Wood, so I'm not in the market for those, but definitely if you like metal needles, that could be another option. So I've told you everything that I love about these needles. I've used them for so many projects over the years. They've held up beautifully. They allow me to do whatever kind of knitting I want. And I actually quite like that they're silver, because if I'm knitting and the sun is setting and I haven't gotten up to turn a lamp on yet, I can see better because they kind of reflect the light a bit. I do have one complaint, other than just my general philosophical complaint that I'm using metal needles instead of wooden needles, which is just a preference thing. My one complaint is that since they're solid stainless steel, the larger sizes, the US 2.5 and the US 3 are where I notice it, which is, what is that in millimeters, 3.0 and 3.25, yeah. They are definitely solid. They have quite a bit of weight to them. And so that, as someone with pain issues in my hands and my neck and shoulders, that kind of makes me worry about using them. So I finally decided to put them to the test and start using them for projects. And it turns out they don't feel as heavy when you're knitting with them as they do when you're just holding them. As I was saying, they do feel less heavy when I knit with them versus when I'm just holding them. But this is a US 3 heavy metal, and these are the US 8s, Darn Pretty in the wood, and these are so much heavier than this. I'm sure that's a very scientific term for you, isn't it? So much heavier. I should have measured them on my kitchen gauge. But even the zeros of the heavy metals, they're about the same weight as these. So that gives you an idea of the weight issue. As you can see. And I think that, I'm not sure how much that just goes with the territory of metal needles versus wooden needles, but that is my one qualm about the set, is that the larger sizes are quite heavy. Hopefully you can't hear the chainsaw. I hope no one's chopping down a tree. That would be really terrible. Hopefully they're just trimming some branches. And I thought I would go ahead. I have a project going, and these are on the 2s. And I thought that I would show you how easily it slides over. So there we go. So woo. I really don't know if that's useful or not, but as you can see, that joint is not catching at all on this yarn. I'm also not a super tight knitter, so I don't know how super tight knitters would fare, but there we go for that. Oh, and since I told you I would show you the cable, it's quite flexible. Hang on, let me pull my sleeve down, then you'll have a better background. So that's how much it's bouncing, and I find that they return to their shape. They don't like stick with their memory, and I can show you. So these are the other ones I have handy. So the black one is Licca, and the gold is Addy Turbo Lace, and the clear is Diet Craft. And here they all are smushed together. So I would say that the Addy Turbo Lace is the most flexible. Then the Diet Craft, and then the Luca is significantly less flexible than either of the other two. So Diet Craft is pretty close to Abby Turbo Lace as far as cable behavior goes. Sorry I don't have other brands to compare. I pretty much found the Diet Craft needles early in my knitting career and decided that they were wonderful and stuck with them, except for in contexts where like they don't offer 000, or I would have bought that instead. But I really love having an interchangeable set that goes in the smaller sizes, because so much of what I knit, either sweaters or hats, are smaller gauges. So it's nice to be able to alternate between those circumferences. Since I knit mainly cardigans and mainly in pieces these days, I'm pretty much using these as flat needles, so I don't need to switch as much as I used to when I was knitting pullovers as well. But I think it's just nice to have a set available. And the only reason why I've decided to start buying Liccas as well is for when I'm knitting with very slippery yarns. So, for instance, I've knit all 3 of my linen yarns, which is Quince & Company Sparrow and Organic Linen, with these heavy metal needles. And especially on this last sweater, I think because the lace was more complicated, those stitches were just hopping off the needles. It was driving me nuts. So I would like to have wooden options for sticky yarns. But other than sticky yarns, in any other context, I'm going, and then maybe in the US 3s, I prefer using the Liccas just because they're lighter weight. But in most of the time, I'm still going to choose my heavy metals. And for anything that requires complicated stitch manipulation, like twisted stitches or that kind of thing, I definitely, even on a US 3, I'm going to pick my heavy metals over the Licca, just because the tips, I love the shape so much. I just find it so easy to do all kinds of things. And that's important when you're dealing with pain issues, especially in your neck and shoulders or hands, because you start to do this if it's hard. Ugh, and even just demonstrating that. And yeah, like you definitely feel it in your body depending on whether your needles are working with you or not. So I'm really glad that I decided to buy this set. It's not cheap, you know, $20 for each set of tips, so that means what the set, or between 20 and 25 depending on what length you get. So a set is going to run you $120 to $150, which includes 3 cables, as I said. You can also buy the cable separately for $8, I think. But when I'm buying knitting needles, as far as I'm concerned, they're going to last my lifetime, and so it makes sense to wait and save up to buy the very best quality. From my perspective, your knitting needs are going to determine what the best quality is that I can possibly afford, because then I'm only buying once. I don't have to upgrade, and I can just use them for my entire life. And Diet Craft is really good at standing behind their products. Although I haven't had any problems with my heavy needles. But yeah, as you can see, woo, they twist around. And even though at this point I've kind of bent that cable a bit because I've used them on so many projects. Let's see. There we go. You can see that there's a little bit of like a bend in that cable, but it doesn't impact at all how well it twists and how well it functions. So I would certainly recommend this set if you are looking for needles that let you easily do all kinds of manipulating of the stitches, or if you prefer metal needles in general. If you're looking for an interchangeable set with super short tips, I mean, that's pretty cool, huh? Personally, I prefer 3.5-inch tips. And also, if you just prefer to buy locally, then this is a great option. And yeah, I mean, it's really nice that it comes with a case and everything too, so. There you have it. That is my review of the needles that I've probably used the most out, well, other than my double points for everything. And yeah, it's really nice to just be able to switch out the needle sizes if I want to do the waist shaping that way, or I don't know. I really like having interchangeable sets. It makes it feel like I don't have to worry about trying to like knit tighter or more loosely because I don't have the next size needle up. So it makes knitting feel more luxurious to me. It's been wonderful talking with you all. I hope to see you again very soon. And feel free to follow me on Instagram or Ravelry if you want to see what I'm up to in the meantime. I post quite a bit of knitting stuff over on Instagram, so I'm the charm of it everywhere, and I always love to hear from you and hear your comments. I especially love if you could help me figure out what kind of socks to knit. I have socks to knit for my dad first, so we've got a little bit of time to think about it and mull it over. Yeah. See you next time. Oh, I almost forgot to do the new segment where I torture the pets so that you can see them as we leave. So here's Moth. Thistle! I know, Moth. You were just picked up off the couch. Come on, Thistle. We're running out of time. And, oh. There's Thistle.